Welcome to the God is Not an Asshole podcast. If you are one of the many people done with religious dogmatism, hang on. You might sense transcendence, but your church or other faith community never seem to get off the ground. You realize that honoring your conscience means more than fitting in and keeping hard-to-explain rules? Hang on. You could probably think of the goodness in your tradition, and you tried your best to save that baby, but there's so much bathwater. Join your hosts, David Norman Moore Jr. in California and Carrie Connolly in New Jersey, who are collaborating to bring on guests who have found life on the other side of fundamentalism. Guests with stories of how they have liberated themselves from beliefs that divide us from each other. None of our guests' narratives are identical, but we hope you'll find something in common with each of them. We invite you to experience our common bond as we all inspire even more of us to embrace the true self.
Well, everyone, Carrie and I are here with Jessica Williams. Her pronouns are she, her. She is a pastor. St. Croix Church is in St. Stephen, New Brunswick, Canada. She is a mother to 3 teens. She's a runner and a poet. And I think that's my earliest encounters with Jessica was as a poet. Before I ever met her, some of her friends at St. Stephen's University, mutual friends, would pass along some of her poetry, which is, you'll find out, quite profound. She's grateful for the ways following her questions led her to where she is today. And she's found work in a church community that aligns and reflects some of the deepest longings of her heart. Jessica believes in the power of love and finds life in co-creating communities that offer places of love and belonging without discrimination. And I'm just so excited about Jess. I said this when I was there in New Brunswick. I think I said it a couple of times. I'm just so excited for you. She is doing the work in her own way that Peter Fitch, who retired as pastor at St. Croix Church after how many years, Jess?
30.
Wow. Yeah. So after 30 years, he and Mary Ellen retired, and Jess ended up doing this work. And it is amazing in more ways than I can really recognize or give language to. But what's going on with you in this moment, Jess?
Wow, there's a lot going on for me in this moment. I'm nervous to be here. You've had such amazing people on your podcast that I'm happy to be here. So in this moment,
you wouldn't be here if there weren't amazing
also
people.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. In this moment, well, I'm just over a year into pastoring at St. Croix Church. So I've I've in some ways settled in, but my personal life has been quite gone through quite a trial in this last year. So it's been not at all what I expected to kind of cut my teeth into pastoring at the same time as such, tumultuous family issues. But I've been met with extraordinary love and compassion and acceptance. And so I would say in this season, we're in Lent, and I've been asking God for help to let go. And so that is where I am, letting go of people and pride and my attachment to perfectionism and performing. And, it's painful.
Wow. I was in a meeting 3 nights ago, with people from around the world. It was Christians for a Free Palestine. And one of the women said something that you just reminded me of. She was talking about her own relationship with faith and community and things like that. And she said, I am learning to get through this breakup with the God of white supremacy and colonialism. And I thought about all of the things that go with breaking up, the sorrows, the grief, how it affects your relationship with other people, how it affects your relationship with your own biological family. And so, I mean, that was more than a notion. I'm sure you can relate to that, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot there.
So one of the things that, I mean, you brought up a lot of things in my mind, but I think I want to get to the intersection of them. And also, just so you know a little bit about where my mind is right now, I am engulfed in the theology of white feminism because I'm working on a dissertation. So I'm kind of like in that place of deconstructing white womanhood and what that all means. And so you mentioned perfectionism, and also during this, going through a tumultuous time where perhaps you are showing up as not your most perfect self, right? In the public role of being a pastor. And, I know that for as much as here in the United States, we love to denigrate pastors as much as possible, and sometimes with good reason. But also that pastors get eaten alive often by their churches. And one of my colleagues in my cohort was actually talking about pastoral grief and how does a congregation meet pastoral grief, right? Because pastors are still human beings who have their own issues, right? So I'm really curious, especially as a woman who's a pastor and a white woman, and the narratives of perfectionism that whiteness gives white womanhood in particular. And I'm not saying nobody else has perfectionist issues. I'm just saying there's a particularity to white womanhood's perfectionism. How do you embody that, resist it within your embodiment? How do you navigate all of those narratives?
Yeah. The really amazing thing for me in this community has been that there's already exists here a strong foundation of welcoming, embracing imperfection. Like they've modeled this so well for me and invited me in. So I really mean it. Like I came to St. Stephen's University, also did my master's here, and to St. Croix Church as the student. And I still feel like a student. And I've kind of stepped into the shoes of my mentor in some ways. But I came to learn and to be transformed. And I think that I am in the midst of that. I think I will always be in the process of that transformation. But I am, I have so much resistance because of a lot of what you just mentioned, Carrie, about, being a leader, being a strong leader and a woman, and wanting to prove something, like I have that full, but that my truer desire is to welcome transformation, and to let myself be real and vulnerable and in need and not know the answers. And I think sometimes when I'm thinking the most clearly, maybe, then I can see that it's kind of hilarious to have someone like me in the position I'm in. I can kind of laugh at it because I'm not a strong, confident leader, and I lose my words often. And so I think maybe the goal isn't to ever become that. Maybe the goal is to be more truly myself.
We just had a conversation with David Hayward, Naked Pastor,
Yeah.
a week ago. And I mentioned how Peter and I found refuge in one another because this is years ago. It was long before you moved there. And we were sitting at his kitchen table and talking about what horrible executives we were and what it's contributed to our friendship. But that's your church. I mean, that's a church that does not call for for leaning in, if you will, to use a term. It's not a church for performance. It's as you just said. Your community embraces imperfection, and I love that. And also, I don't know if you were there when the church had to leave the denomination. Were you there at that time?
No, I wasn't here, but I was in Winnipeg, leaving my own church for the same, because of the same decisions. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm assuming though that's the LGBTQ question.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so
How did I guess?
Good way to go. You're a savant, Carrie. So Peter insisted on performing marriages for queer folks, and this went to the top of the denomination. They had conversations about it. They had debates, and we probably don't have time to get into it now, but I got brought into that thing. And almost stumbled into it because I was invited to participate in a conference and also to speak at one of the churches. And I assumed that everybody, because my connection to those churches were through your church, I assumed they were all like you. Yeah. I assumed that, whoa, okay, this is going to be a great conference. This is going to be a great experience. So I went into it just being my full self with no filter, and it stirred up some trouble. I say all of that because it distinguishes the humanity of your community there. And that's why I said multiple times, I'm so excited about you, because to me, you embody all of that. Before you had this role, to me, that's what I saw in you. And that's what's so exciting, because you are not this hard driving executive. I love it.
Yeah, that's true. And it's very uncomfortable. But what I'm thinking, David, as you said, that is just, back then when St. Croix Church was going through all of that, and before I became a student at SSU, I was drawn here because I was looking for any voice in that particular denomination or movement that was speaking out for LGBTQ inclusion. I needed that to be okay in a church context, and loved that particular group and didn't want to leave. And I was pointed to Peter Fitch, and it's just saved my life.
It's really interesting to me, the fact that, and I think that this goes back to the leadership styles, and what our society, which is defined by white patriarchy, really values in leadership and what they don't, right? And I think that, there are very specific types of leadership that are deeply valuable, especially in a church context. But society tells us that that's not the right way to lead, right? And they do often tend to be, no, I'm not even going to say that. I was going to say they tend to be women's ways of leading, but I'm not even going to say that because that's essentialist. I think it's, but I do think that there are ways that are not slick. I'm thinking about a very specific type of leadership that is, glossy and slick and well polished. And to you said it, like you said, you sometimes lose your words, right? That incredibly quote well spoken leader who lacks very often the depth of relationality, right? Like I know for me, so another guest that we've had on the podcast, Doug Paget, I had the opportunity to sit with him one time, and he was like, "Hey, let me ask you some questions about you and leadership." And he's like, he asked me some questions. He's like, "Do you often find yourself as the person after hearing my story a little bit? He goes, do you often find yourself the person who's pointing out stuff that could go wrong, or like, are you pointing out stuff that needs to get fixed, or are you the person who's talking about LGBTQ inclusion when everybody else is in the church is against that?" And I'm like, yeah, like that is who I am. And he goes, yeah, that's a very specific kind of leadership. It's called contrarian leadership, and it has a place and it has its own faults, but every organization needs at least one good contrarian leader. And I felt so seen and heard and understood in that moment. It was very healing for me. Right. And I think it's something very similar for you. And I don't know what leadership style you are, on one of the many, many kind of matrices there are, but I think that there's a very specific type of leadership, and that doesn't look like what society teaches us leadership should look like. And I also think that when that kind of leadership intersects with womanhood, it is even more devalued.
Yeah.
It is even more devalued, right? Because then it is cast as essentialist of being feminine and therefore less valuable. Yeah. So I'm curious to know from you, where do you think your strengths are as a leader? Because you don't necessarily embody what, and maybe you do. I don't know you at all. This is the first time I'm meeting you, but yeah, like what strengths do you bring to the pastorate? Because specifically, you're not slick and shiny.
Yeah. Years ago, I had a friend tell me that I was that I was a leader, but that I led from behind. And she saw me kind of standing at the back of a long line, and there was someone at the front, but I was at the very back of the line, looking for who wasn't with us yet, or who was falling a bit behind, and kind of pulling them in, eyes on the back, and who's struggling. And I think, it really resonated for me. And I think it resonated in a way of like, that's who I want to be, even if I find myself at times at the front, that I want to remember to have my eyes, like if you imagine, traditionally, like the pastor standing at the front of the church, I want to imagine myself always at the back entrance, like who's hanging out at the very back and kind of slowly walking away, or taking lots of bathroom breaks, or hardly able to come in the door, who's that? And are we making sure to welcome and find pathways of welcoming those people? So I would say that is a strength of mine. It can be a little bit, if people always say like our strengths are connected to our weaknesses. So it can be a little bit anxiety driven too, of like trying to make sure that I'm, getting it all right, like not losing anyone. So it's just interesting.
Hypervigilance.
I can operate that way out of a place of anxiety or out of a place of love and compassion.
There's actually a diagram of, I think it was in a book about servant leadership, that says instead of the typical hierarchy of, the leader at the top of a pyramid and then a small group and then of that they're leading and then a larger group, that it's actually inverted, that a servant leader is actually an inverted pyramid and is at the bottom, right? That makes me think very much of what you're talking about, and the strengths there.
Can you say something, Jess, about the landscape of female or at least non-male leadership in your former denomination?
Mm. Um, the denomination itself, it eventually embraced women, or welcomed women to be leaders, like fully pastors. But it has a history. It took quite a while. I might get it wrong, but I think it was in the 90s when when they decided that women could be pastors. So a little bit late. It might have been later than that. Um,
Okay,
and
so let me ask this,
Mhm.
because I have a relationship with the denomination that fully affirms in terms, what's on paper says this is what we do. But if you look around the denomination around the country and, especially around the country, but even beyond, there aren't very many women actually doing it. We just say that we believe in that.
Yes. Yes. I would say that the trend continues to be male leadership. And it's certainly what I saw most. I didn't see pastors who were women in my churches that I grew up in. I saw it sometimes on the periphery, and I think there is a shift right now because you can even when I started my studies at SSU, the program was a master's in ministry, and it appealed largely to pastors for a long time who were looking for higher education but had maybe a long history of pastoring. And what I noticed right away was that the women coming into that program were coming in just with the hopes that if they got this degree, they might be invited into leadership in their churches. And the men had been pastoring for years without it.
Mm.
They were coming in for other reasons, good reasons, but that was a clear. It was very easy to see this. Um, and I would say I work at SSU now. I'm the registrar and work in admissions, and you're definitely seeing more women. But admissions has gone up, but there's more equality between men and women in the program, and then also women who are pastors already. So that's
Mm.
nice to see, but I think that's only happened in the last, I don't know, 10 years at the most, like maybe even just 5 years, the trend in that direction.
I will be honest with you, and I only have this perspective now that I am I'm in a doctorate program. I'm in the demon program. So like I'm only really understanding the depth of the importance of a solid theological education, regardless of where you end up falling, liberal, conservative, or, but just the amount of predominantly men, to your point, who are pastoring churches solely based on the education that they received in their homes or from their mentors who were very similar to them and have never touched and actually almost hold disdain for any kind of actual academic rigor around scripture or around the archaeology of the Bible or of, historical criticism, like any of these things, right? It's a little terrifying to think the level of power that these people are given in the lives of their congregants. That is the thing that frightens me. I actually had a conversation with somebody, a friend of mine, and I was kind of teasing her because when she goes to the doctor, she does her research. If she's going to a new doctor, she does so much research about what this person's education was and where they went, how they graduated, and like all of this stuff, what kind of certifications they have. But she doesn't do any of that kind of research about the people who are leading her faith organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, maybe it's something to look into.
Yeah.
because you're about to, especially if you're going to bring family members, their children there, you're about to shape your family's worldview. And you want to know who is going to be doing the shaping. How were they shaped? Right.
Yeah.
So your conversation about women coming in, and of course we know women need so many more letters behind their names to even be taken seriously. In in circles like this. So can you speak a little bit to maybe the ways that theological education actually impacted the way you pastor?
Sure. Yeah. See, again, it's well, in my bio that I sent in, which I didn't even remember quite what I wrote because bios are difficult every time you try to put it together what really matters to you. But as I prepared for the podcast today, just thinking, and focusing a bit, I kept thinking like it's just for me, it has been about following my questions. And that has been such a good and true guide for me. And so I pursued it's probably a little bit that I wouldn't have given myself permission to name a desire to be in church leadership, because it's like a far-fetched. So there could have been a thread of desire under there, but mostly I so desperately wanted to not lose God. Like
Or lose who you are, right? You came to this role as a poet, and that's how many people know you, as a poet. I mean, how many poets become pastors? I know that there are pastors who write some poetry, but it's almost to me like poetic justice that you have this role. And I just love that you keep being the poet.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, and poetry was the first place where I found my voice theologically, I would say. Because I could say things in a poem, and they would even let me say them like on stage at church. That if that was in a sermon, I mean, it would cause all kinds of trouble. If I was teaching.
Good trouble.
In a poem, I could just say it. Is Jesus coming back? Who is this guy?
That is so wonderfully subversive. I love it.
Yeah.
So are you still doing poetry?
Yes. I still use poetry as a tool to process my experiences. And so,
You just reminded me that you're Canadian when you said process.
That's a great compliment because I'm American, but I've lived.
That's right. You were born in Washington. That's right.
Yeah.
But you've been there for a while, so you're essentially Canadian now.
Yes. So, so I continue to use, write poetry for that because it's really like a therapeutic relationship that I have with poetry. And it's always amazing to me that it resonates with anyone. Like, how is anyone even understanding this? It's so specific to what I'm experiencing. And I think that's my best poetry when I try to write poetry that is like, when I sit down to write poetry and the motivation is I want to get a point across, it's not as, it's just a lot of striving.
The style of Black preaching incorporates poetry. And you just reminded me of, someone said to me recently that, when you preach like that, it really moves me because I haven't always done it that way. And as you know, because you've spoken, most of the folks in our community are not Black.
Yeah.
And it's a different approach when you are trying to preach Black, but the folks are not Black because it's interactive, right? And so sometimes you wonder if you can really go there. But people want it. People want poetry. People don't want to just be given instructions. They don't want just information. The poetry, it expands and elasticizes the heart and the mind. And that's how I know you. I mean, before I ever saw you in person, I'd read what you'd written. I just thought, wow, I can work with this. This is very helpful to me in ways that, a sermon typically is not, or, just an essay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you see that? Do you see your bringing your poetic way of being to your community? Do you see that, influencing people? In what ways are people being touched?
Um, I hope it's influencing people. I think what happens, it's interesting. So much of my poetry gets vulnerable. And my sermons are like that too. So you're right. They're very poetically driven. And I write more sermons these days than poetry. It's like my creativity has gone in a different direction out of necessity. But I think what it does, I have not prepared this at all, so I'm processing. I think what it might do is open up a space for response. And often, often what comes up most naturally in people is uh, an impulse to express their love and care for me as a person, as I've revealed myself to them. And I can only hope and trust that that's a huge gift, because it's like it's a it's an opportunity to express that love, and I hope that it's mutual, that there's a basically what I'm saying is I'm receiving like I feel like I'm showing up, offering my heart and my life as it is, and then receiving the love of a community back. And that just keeps happening. So maybe we're becoming more human through that process together.
You know what I love about that? And I was just having a similar conversation with somebody else, is that the ways in which that subverts power dynamics, because throughout the history of the church, there has been this dynamic of the pastor or the priest, right, being the intermediary between, God and the people. And as much as our denominations may say, no, 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 that's not the way, that's still the way, right? Like that's still the underlying like feeling that a lot of people have. So a lot of people put so much power and authority into their pastors, whether the pastors want it there or not, sometimes, and some do, and some don't necessarily. But that's a natural thing. Like even people on Facebook who know I went to seminary, they'll send me DMs and say, please pray for me. It's like, not, my prayers don't count more than yours, like, I mean, I'm happy to do it, but they don't count more, And so when you open up in vulnerability and in authenticity, and you are willing to receive love and care from the people that you are, quote, supposed to be shepherding, right?
Yeah.
That subverts, that's subversive. That subverts the power dynamic that has been set up, I think, incorrectly, wrongly, in the body of the church and of God, right? So I think that's so beautiful when you do that.
I love how you just said that. I just have goosebumps, because it's true. It's like you, the community, you are God to me, actually.
Yes,
Like
that's
I'm not.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
I'm thinking of something that Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the pastor theologian in Germany during World War II, said. He said, the person who loves their dream of community will destroy community, but the person who loves those around them will create community. And I think that kind of describes my experience of St. Croix Church. It's not trying to so much be something or set all these goals of trying to get wherever, it almost seems like my experience of the church world is often you've got to have something to do together And I'm not talking like a cookout or, barbecue or whatever, but like there's got to be a building program. We all have to pull together to support this missionary, all of these things. And I don't think I find that to be characteristic of your community. And I think that's why I find it so attractive and so healing. I've been going there, traveling all the way from Southern California to New Brunswick at least once a year for 18 years.
Yeah.
Um, and not like as a vacation. I have work to do, but it is something of a vacation. It is. I find refreshment being in your world that in some ways I don't find when I'm on a beach in Jamaica or something like that. I just find this sense of healing, restorative community. Do you recognize that? What you have to know that that's
Yeah.
what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. I do recognize it. It's so rare. And I think it's interesting. I don't know that everyone does recognize it. So I think it's interesting who does. um,
Would you say that the people who tend to recognize it are people who have not been in it forever, in it for most of their lives, or what would you say?
I maybe, but even I think the long time though, yeah, long time members of the community know it. Uh,
Mm.
so, but yeah, it's very like as you were saying that, I was thinking, yeah, it really the community itself isn't shiny and impressive and or goal oriented or any of those things. It's like, no, we're just here being. Like there is
Mm.
nothing else. Uh, we're being together.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so I think there it can be very unimpressive. I think to people, like where are we?
And
What
I
are we?
and I want to say this, and I want you to take it in all the best ways, which I think you will.
Yeah.
Um, that's one of the reasons I was so glad that you took this role. What, 3 years ago? Is it now?
Uh, no, we moved here 3 years ago, but I've just been in the role for a little over a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I found that out, it's that okay, because I know Jessica won't ruin this thing.
That's good. I
you,
hope not.
you won't. You won't. Jessica won't spoil it.
Yeah.
It's going to continue to be this thing. I mean, who hires a poet? Uh,
It's good. It's good. Yeah, and I should say I work with a leadership collective, and so
yes.
my job kind of switched from uh your typical like what you would think of as a lead pastor. That's not it, but as a facilitator. So I work to make sure that there's someone secured to speak every Sunday, and to make sure that it's not me. Um, and to kind of keep all the pieces spinning. But
So leading from
definitely,
behind, that sounds like.
yeah, 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 and
That's kind of what I do. I know that I'm the most frequent presenter, but it's like once a month, twice a month. And I see myself as the facilitator, really,
yeah,
as a curator.
yes,
And it's so much more enjoyable because basically it keeps me from just completely getting drained, because I can
Mm.
remember the days when I didn't do it this way, and
mhm,
it takes so much out of you
mhm,
to have to lead that way. Maybe it doesn't for some people. Maybe they're wired that way. I don't know.
Mm.
yeah,
But for people like yourself, it would take too much energy,
mhm,
um, our life energy, and we have other things to do. Being family members, being parents and
yeah,
partners, and and all kinds of things in the community.
mhm, yeah, yeah.
I'm curious to know, because I love what you're saying about following your questions. And I see that I can see how following your questions could lead you to poetry, and how following your questions could lead you to God, like to the church, and to, and to seminary. I could see all of that. So what are the questions that are driving you right now? If you were to sit down and write a poem right now, or, a sermon about questions, what are those questions that are really bugging you right now?
Oh, the first thing that I just felt at a heart and gut level when you said that is, I would say God's voice or invitation in my ear recently that was like something like, so maybe my own voice, you know what I mean? Something like, so are you going to believe it? Are you going to let
Mm,
yourself believe it? And that was something about this. I have pursued a theology of unconditional love, you know,
mhm, mhm,
divine love. And I believe it intellectually, but experientially. That was the invitation. Are you going to let
mhm.
yourself experience unconditional divine love that is here for you in the middle of your life falling apart? Are you going to let it happen? Like,
Mm,
yeah. So I would say that's the current invitation.
that's beautiful.
Can you say something about, and the reason I'm asking this is because I have been so impacted by it over the years. Say something about music in your church.
Oh, music. Well, we use all kinds of music. So one of my first Sundays at SCC, they played an Alanis Morissette song.
That's awesome.
I forget which one it is. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Was it? Is she the one that does? If what if God was one of us, or something like
Uh,
that?
no, but that's Joan Osborne, another favorite song.
Yes. Uh-huh.
um, very
She's the
similar
one who
to
does
that.
thank you.
Yes, yeah, she does. Thank you. This is a song that has a swear word in it. Um, well, I
Ah.
think the chorus, it hinges on you see everything,
Oh,
you know
yes. I
every
love
part,
that song.
all my light and
Yes.
all my dark. Yeah,
Ah,
Yes.
yes.
yeah,
Love that song.
yeah.
Such a good song. It's one
But
of my
yeah,
favorites of hers.
so really, we can sing very traditional, your typical like Christian music. I mean, well, we avoid the real rough ones that we don't really agree with anymore. I can't sing anymore, but we really welcome the secular right alongside the sacred without really any uh, like it's not even a question. Like
Yeah.
no, it's not shocking to anyone. It's truly welcomed. Same with prayers from different faith traditions. So what a breath of fresh air that is so truly welcomed.
And I know that in this moment, Tina oversees the music, but there have been like so many different people playing so many different instruments. I'm thinking of Matt Fries, who I guess plays like 7 or 8 different instruments, but it's like it's just that part, that piece of what you all do is poetic as well.
Mhm.
Um, and and it's not a huge community, but it's almost. I mean, there's always somebody there to do it.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not the same person all the time or the same people. It changes. It's almost like if you had a family and several people in the family were musicians, and they just got together and said, "Let's do this Sunday. Let's let's."
Yeah.
It feels that way to me, and I was deeply impacted when I first went there. So say a bit more about how you do music and how you attract musicians.
Um, oh my gosh, I feel like the musicians just they have like this electric pull, like just brings them to each other, you know. Um, Rick Coates, we recently
Mm.
had a gathering with all the people involved in music at the church, and he said, we have no business being this good, like having this many, like the quality of musicians.
It is so, it has such a high quality of music. It's amazing to me.
It
You
is.
know,
It is.
it's how does that happen?
I don't know. And sometimes I'm sitting there on a Sunday morning and there's like, 25 people and then this incredible band. And I'm thinking like we have no, like, who are we that we get to sit here and just be given this gift of such incredible music? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um yeah. Oh, I wanted to give an example that came to my mind. I think this came from Peter, but it maybe came from Tina. But this we do it a lot these days, which is see, I'm not a musician, but maybe a melody that might be the wrong word. But it's a combination of the song "The Water Is Wide." You know, the water is wide, I cannot get over. Give me a
Hmm.
boat that will carry two. And when I survey the wondrous cross, and it goes back and forth. There's like a verse of "The Water Is Wide," then a verse of
Yes.
the hymn, and it is just profoundly beautiful. And
Yes, I remember you all doing that song this past fall when I was there, and I was just thinking, wow, this is so captivating. This is, I mean,
yeah.
but the thing is that yes, it was captivating, but that's what I experienced when I first went there, 18 years ago, and it's always something more, something different.
Mm.
It's almost like some divine hand is orchestrating this whole thing in a very unassuming way. And there are no star performers, right? There are no, there are no star performers. There's nobody like, really pushing people to participate. None of that's going on. It's like, okay, let's see, what should we do next? And then this glorious thing happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say I'm learning to trust that, because I have a tendency to over prepare. So this community is definitely teaching me to trust. Like, yeah.
I love that. So I'm curious about, you've mentioned that you're in a tumultuous time of your life and having, I feel like I'm just on the verge of coming out of one. So
Mm.
where my entire life disintegrated and I'm slowly finding the bricks to reassemble. So
Yay.
yes, yay indeed. So I'm curious about where you find the breath and the strength to continue to move on when you go through that. And I will also say, as I'm thinking about that, a guest that we had, I think it was last week, and he was relating this to, I think, the deconstruction of the faith of your childhood, where he said, everybody has to crack the egg, no matter who you are or what faith tradition you grew up in. You have to crack the egg
Right.
to break free of it, and then eventually maybe you'll come back and make an omelet, but you have to crack the egg that you were born in. And I kind of feel like there's so much value to the complete disintegration of a life in order to crack the egg and
Mhm.
rebuild
Mhm.
something. So I'm curious about that for you. How, especially as a woman, as a pastor, how do you rebuild? How do you find breath and sustenance and nurturance in
Mhm.
a time of great
Mhm.
turbulence?
I think I like that, cracking the eggshell. I think letting that happen, letting it break,
Mhm. Mhm.
is the first step, and I wanted to hang on. I want to hang on and keep gluing it together and not let it happen.
Mhm.
Um, and I was really trying to do that for a long time. And so this experience of having to let go, knowing that I need to let go, let it break, I have no choice even, you know.
Mhm.
And then I think, I mean, it's words that I've like cringed at for so long, like surrender, you know, these things that I could hear and just like I don't know. I don't know that how to do that, you know. And
Yeah.
I guess you don't know until you are there, like and in it.
Mhm.
And so that
It's
is,
kind of like just putting one foot in front of the other, waking up every day and
yeah, yeah.
kind of doing
And
it.
finding, yeah, finding that I get through. I was going to make a joke though, because I think at the Oscars, like Robert Downey Jr. maybe in his speech started with, "I want to thank my traumatic childhood or my childhood trauma." So you know,
Yes.
I think that is one way that I'm getting through is yeah,
Yes.
have some,
Resilience.
yes, that is the word. Some resilience
Yes.
developed early on.
Mm.
Have some tools and maturity, uh,
Yeah.
at least a
Yeah,
little.
the trick with that childhood trauma is figuring out, are my tools dysfunctional tools or are they
Yes,
functional tools? Like, are they tools that will do more damage? Are they sledgehammers? Or are they things that will, rebuild? That's the trick
absolutely.
of discernment.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah,
think maturity is the lens through which we can see those things and say, okay, this one maybe I need to put away back in the toolbox because it's
yeah.
not so great.
Okay, Jess, I want to ask you before we stop today, and honestly, it's because I trust you uh, and look up to you. Um, Carrie and I have been doing this not quite a year. And so we're like on parallel tracks in some ways.
Mhm.
Um, can you think of ways that we can? Uh, I don't know if the question should be do a better job, but can we better connect with people? How can we humanize uh, this podcast? God is not an asshole.
Oh, wow. That's a big, I'm not expecting a question like that.
Mhm.
Um, and who am I to know? Um, I think you're doing such an incredible job, you know, in every episode that I listen to and inviting conversation. Also, I never knew what behind the scenes looked like. And so coming on here and seeing how it works behind the scenes is amazing. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just a conversation that's so easy. And I thought it would be way more complicated. So
Mm.
can definitely see the humanizing and relational element that you bring in. And so all I can think of is like I think right now in the culture and times in the life of the church and just society, you know, theology and culture, that's our degree here, um, that there's so much fear to have open conversations, so much fear about just not like getting it wrong and so then not speaking. So I just think the more we can invite, you can invite people to show up and to have the conversation and to not have to be something other than you know who they are, where they are. Uh,
Yeah.
that's that's a beautiful thing.
Hopefully
I,
that's
I
what we're
love how
doing.
you I love how you just said, first of all, and then you, I guess, kind of corrected yourself. The more that we can invite,
Yeah.
you said,
Mhm.
and then you said you can invite. I think Carrie and I would like to keep the we,
Mhm.
and that you would feel such a co-collaborator, co-creator,
Well,
even I mean, not to say that there's work for you to do, but just in the spirit of things, that if we can see this project as a we thing
mhm.
and to have, I mean, we don't have and it's Carrie, me, and our producer Josh, and that's all we have. And so we don't have like a board of directors, and we don't have any of those things. But if somehow your presence can somehow be a part of this, I think that we would just love that. I don't even know what that looks like. Would you be open to that?
Yes.
Putting you on the spot?
No, yes, I don't even know what that means, but I just, I love you. I love you, David, and I love you already, Carrie.
Thank you. Same.
Yeah. So,
well, we are at the end of our hour, and it has been such a pleasure speaking with you and getting to know you. So thank you so much for being here today and seeing the back end of how our things work here, and which, as you can see, is not fancy at all.
Yeah,
amazing.
And
it's been a pleasure. How is there a place that people can find your poetry?
It's kind of hard to find. Yeah, I don't have a good place to send people, but you definitely could Google like Jessica Williams / Clarion Journal. A lot of my work has been published there, but nothing recent. And then I had an Instagram account for a while. It's findable, Night Song Poetry. I abandoned it.
Yeah. It happens.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But Night, KNIGHT, Song Poetry.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much for being here today. We are people who have left behind performance-based religion and the shame that comes with it. Maybe you have a personal liberation story to tell, and we want to know about it. Please contact us on Twitter at GodIsNotAnAsshole or text 805-703-8393, because the world needs to know that God is not an asshole. The show's music is composed by Christian Moore, show art created by Evan Kerr, and the episodes are produced by Josh Perez.